Okay, all right. Well, look, thanks all of you for being here. In addition to the same old joke, I had the same old speech from last year. And you're probably wondering why. It's not due to or an inability to create another speech. It's because you obviously didn't listen last year. So I'm going to tell you the same thing I told you last year, and that is that we need to get this ATC reform done. So I will in a moment turn to my speech, but that's what I was going to say. While I'm somewhat kidding about giving the same speech, the reason we're giving the same speech is because we're not giving up on this. This is not over, and it's really important. So if you were here last year, I'm sorry. You're going to hear it again. We changed it a little bit. We'll see. All right. The U.S. airline industry is fundamentally different than it's ever been. We are consistently profitable and more competitive than ever. We're taking delivery of new aircraft at an astounding rate. And we're making significant improvements to the travel experience, both at airports and onboard our aircraft. And we're returning money to shareholders, and we are taking care of employees. That's all great news. Airlines are healthy and investing back into their businesses. Customers are benefiting, and the evidence is in the output. More people are flying, more packages are being shipped, and we're hiring more people than ever before. There's never been a better time to work in our industry, and there's never been a better time to fly. But there's one area of our business where our customers are being shortchanged every day, and that's our nation's air traffic control system. See, I told you. For the past year, I've joined my industry colleagues in strongly advocating for fundamental reform of the U.S. air traffic control system. We are aligned with the individuals who have the most at stake personally in this debate, the men and women who operate the system on a daily basis, and the thousands of commercial airline pilots who fly it. Even though an excellent proposal for reform by Chairman Bill Schuster did not get enacted earlier this year with the FAA reauthorization process, we're very encouraged by the fact that the authorization was limited to just over a year to allow a continued and thorough review and discussion of the topic. Anyone who thinks this issue is dead wrong. The additional time for consideration allows a more fulsome vetting of the process to fully address the concerns that have been raised. For those in the room who don't follow this subject in great detail, let me explain why this is so important. For airlines, the air traffic control system is in effect our production line. The quality and efficiency of our product is dependent upon how well this production line works. So we have a huge stake in a strong ATC system. Now look, there is little debate about the need to advance from a system that continues to use World War II processes and technology to one that incorporates new state-of-the-art data communication and standards. So the question isn't about the ultimate objective, but how quickly we can get there, and whether the United States will be able to lead the world in advancing next-generation air traffic control. For more than 20 years now, studies have concluded that these objectives can best be achieved by removing the air traffic control function from federal government budgeting and operating constraints and allowing it to operate in a business-like fashion under strict safety regulation by the FAA. This can be achieved by creating a stable source of funding, facilitating long-term capital expenditures and planning, allowing a steady stream of training and recruiting of employees, and ensuring that all stakeholders have a voice in the process. If we can accelerate the pace of moving to next-generation air traffic control, we can increase margins of safety sooner, reduce delays, lower carbon emissions, open up more capacity for competition, provide a stable working environment for the agency's employees, and improve service to the traveling public. So, look, amid all the rhetoric flying around this issue, there are 5 indisputable facts. First, those who understand the system best support a fundamental change. The past 3 leaders of the FAA's air traffic organization are all strong supporters of transformational reform based on their experience, expertise, and frustrations with the constraints of the current system. Second, like Peter Brady. Second, the organization representing the hardworking and highly skilled air traffic controllers supports this reform. The National Air Traffic Controllers Association has pledged its complete cooperation in designing and implementing a smooth transition plan. Third, the vast majority of the entities that depend on the system for their livelihood, passenger airlines, strongly support reform. The one airline that prefers the status quo appears to be interested in preserving a competitive advantage instead of improving commercial aviation for all Americans. The rest of us, large and small, new and old, global and national, all believe this is extremely important. Fourth, support for this concept has been solidly bipartisan for more than 4 decades. One of the strongest advocates of this type of reform was the Clinton administration, whose efforts were led personally by Vice President Al Gore. Many advocates of the current reform proposal are former government officials from both sides of the aisle. And fifth and finally, there's simply nothing radical nor unusual about this concept. More than 50 other nations have moved to this structure in one form or another, and some did it decades ago. None have chosen to reverse course and return to their previous systems. While the U.S. will be one of the last major countries to change, we will have the distinct advantage of being able to adopt the practices of those before us to ensure a smooth and seamless transition. So these compelling reasons are why there's no way we're giving up on this fight. And I truly believe there's a game change on the horizon that has the potential to get us across the finish line in our collective goal of fundamental reform. And that game-changing element may be present in this room today. In this distinguished audience are people on both sides of the aisle who may be able to influence the direction of the next administration. Some of you might even become members of the next administration. To you, I say this is a cause that is crying out for leadership from the White House and one that could be a proud legacy of the next administration for decades to come. The next president will face even more challenges of a constrained budget environment and a desire to reassert U.S. leadership in global aviation. We're optimistic that regardless of who wins, the next administration will agree with the overwhelming majority of experts that it's time to remove the FAA's air traffic organization from federal budget constraints by creating a not-for-profit entity with a public policy mandate, one that's fully paid for by the users of the system. Such an entity could issue bonds, raise capital, and increase investments in both people and technology without adding to the federal deficit. And, like airlines and general aviation operators, the new entity will be strictly regulated by the FAA to ensure the highest degree of safety. The plan that we support is not one to change technology or direction, but rather a plan to ensure steady, long-term financing and to lift constraints on moving forward with next-gen more quickly. We believe in the need for reform so strongly that the passenger airlines are willing to move from a system in which we merely collect and pass on tax revenues from our customers to fund the system, to a new system in which we actually write the checks ourselves through user fees. This is as strong an endorsement of change as any we can imagine. And we aren't attempting to shift the burden of paying for the system to other users. Despite our belief there will be savings from a more efficient system, airlines are assuming we will continue to pay the same amount that we do today for ATC, and thus general aviation costs will not increase. The most significant government-driven changes in our business in the past have resulted from a mutual effort of the executive and legislative branches to forge common ground to achieve a public policy goal. The bold decision to enact transportation deregulation is a prime example. It happened only because of leadership and cooperation from both the White House and Capitol Hill, with strong public interest and private sector support. At the time, there was very active opposition to deregulation among many players, including American Airlines. It wasn't me. It was some guy named Crandall. But look, no one can deny deregulation has been a huge success. It's made air travel much more affordable and efficient, and safety has improved exponentially. So now let me briefly address some of the myths and distortions that we've heard about the proposals for reform. First, we just don't understand the campaign of the corporate jet lobbyists who accuse the commercial airlines of plotting to take over the air traffic control system through privatization in order to drive up costs to general aviation and squeeze them out. Look, I can't make it any clearer than this. The notion that there is a hidden agenda to harm general aviation is pure fiction. In addition to not increasing their costs, we also support the inclusion of general aviation appointees in the governing body of a new ATC system. We are huge supporters of general aviation. They provide the majority of our pilots to our system, and we're not about to or do we want to do anything to harm the general aviation body. Second, one of the oddest arguments against reform is that since the United States has the largest and most complex airspace in the world, we should reject any change. In fact, the opposite's true. Indeed, that's one of the principal reasons we need reform. Our system is large and complex, but that's why it has such a huge impact on the nation's economy and well-being. It's all the more reason we need the resources, skills, long-term vision, and agility to move forward with more speed and greater margins of safety. If we continue to fall behind in developing and implementing next-generation aviation technology, the impact will be far greater here than in any other nation. The choice before Congress and the next administration will be to make a fundamental change or to endorse the status quo. We know what will happen if we stick to the status quo. The U.S. will continue to struggle to support the large and complex system with a looming shortage of air traffic controllers, budget constraints, and the inability to make long-term plans and commitments. As that happens, the ability to innovate and lead will be increasingly overtaken by the need to keep the ATC system operating with limited financial and human resources. In other words, we'll be treading water with very large waves coming. Third, the argument that somehow this reform would jeopardize safety turns everything we know about best practices on its head. Today, we have the safest air transportation system in the world. The reforms being suggested will make it even safer. The commercial airlines would never support a plan if we had any doubt about this whatsoever. Neither would those directly charged with keeping our skies safe. The largest union within the FAA, NATCA. It's the men and women of NATCA who work tirelessly to safely move more than 2 million passengers on nearly 30,000 flights every day throughout the country. NATCA's support is not surprising, as they've seen firsthand that air traffic control providers outside of government deliver enhanced safety and innovation. In fact, one of the significant advantages of the proposed structure is that it will separate ATC services function from the ATC safety function, significantly reducing the potential for conflicts of interest due to self-regulation. The model of separating the regulatory and operating functions has resulted in safety improvements in many countries, allowing the FAA to focus solely on the safety regulation of ATC, similar to its regulation of other aspects of aviation, will make the agency even more effective in this mission. Finally, we have a recent addition. This is new to the speech. This is where I added some stuff. We have a new addition to the flawed arguments against reform, and it's a good one. The only commercial airline not endorsing ATC reform has begun arguing that it's not necessary to do reform because most airline delays are not caused by air traffic control. That's true. Weather is a larger cause of delays than ATC. But measuring delays versus schedule is obviously not the proper metric to determine whether ATC reform would benefit Americans. That's because we schedule our airplanes and our flight times with full knowledge of the inefficiencies of the current system. We know we'll be delayed en route. We know we'll be delayed leaving LaGuardia at 5 p.m. So we build these inefficiencies into our scheduled flight times. Saying we shouldn't fix our ATC system because it doesn't cause the most delays versus schedule is like saying there's no traffic problem in Los Angeles because the public always knows it's going to take 1 hour to go 5 miles. Just because you know it's going to take you an hour doesn't mean it shouldn't get better. Reforming ATC will improve our highway system. It will make every single flight take less time. And that's great news for the flying public, competition, and the environment. So the strange thing about this argument is that anyone who works for an airline or who follows the industry closely knows it's nonsense as soon as they hear it. Yet it's an argument made by an airline. That same airline CEO, the now retired Richard Anderson, I didn't even say anything but his name. Before they engaged in this fight against ATC reform, back in 2012 in this same city, told the U.S. Chamber of Commerce this. Okay, I'm going to quote Richard now. So I need to sound like Richard. Delta's block time in 1956. No, I'm not going to do that. God, I wish I could. Okay, but Delta's block time, and this is Richard speaking, not me. Delta's block time, and then he said this in 2012. Delta's block time in 1956, flying between Atlanta and Washington National in a DC-6, was the same as it is today on a 757-200. I was 1 year old. Richard, who's really old. and that's 4 years ago. So our scheduled flight time hasn't changed between Atlanta and DCA since I was 1 year old. So look, I mean, again, I'm not making fun of Richard. I understand he may have been a part of the administration himself, so I'll need to explain that if he is. But look, they know this is the case. They're making an argument that is not, that they know isn't right. We all know that looking at delays versus schedule and saying, therefore, since ATC delays aren't the biggest issue, we don't need ATC reform, makes no sense whatsoever. It's a silly argument, and that's a kind word. And they know better by their own comments. The fact that it takes the same amount of time to fly from Atlanta to Reagan today as it did in 1956, with all the technology improvements, says one thing: the ATC system hasn't kept up with our ability to fly airplanes around the world. So the other point I'd make is that DC-6, this is just a rumor, but I understand that Delta is looking to bring those back as they look to retire some of their older aircraft. But it's just a rumor, and I probably should not have been spreading it, but it is a rumor I've heard. Okay, I better get back to my script. Okay. In seriousness, it's clear we have factions making specious arguments in parochial attempts to fight off reform. We should not allow that to continue. We need to hold all interested parties accountable, and we need intelligent dialogue on the topic. The year between now and FAA reauthorization allows us to do that. We are confident we can prevail over that time. But while we're optimistic, we are not unrealistic. We know this will take work and education and some courage. And that brings me to the worst possible argument against reform, that the transition will be difficult. We're a country built on the foundation of doing difficult things. Surely we're capable of making a transition that more than 50 other countries have already accomplished. To argue that our great nation, our talented FAA employees, and our collective aviation industry can't do this because it's too hard is selling us short, and that's offensive. We believe the greater risk to the public interest, controllers, the traveling and shipping public, small community service, and our economy is to maintain the status quo. To ensure our aviation system is the gold standard for safety and technology, we must embrace change and put aside turf wars by working together for the greater good of the system. We encourage all of you to join us in that effort, and we appreciate your support. Thank you very much.